Mr. Rishikavi Raghudas of USA. He is a professional astrologer, a gifted poet, screenwriter, and producer. His lecture topic is Hollywood and the Neptune Factor. Mr. Rishikavi Raghudas.
Okay. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I hope you are. Okay. Hollywood is a very fascinating topic. I am in the industry myself. It's a worldwide phenomenon. I actually, just plug, I have the cover article in the current Dell horoscope. Astrology goes to the Oscars. I predict the Oscars every year, and I'm happy to say with a large degree of accuracy. So I haven't studied them yet. I've been here. I've been traveling. So I was in a tomb in Egypt when they announced the nomination. So when I get back in a few days, you'll know. Okay, so Hollywood and the Neptune factor. In modern Western astrology, Neptune is the ruler of film. Neptune represents the principles of creativity, imagination, and spirituality. Neptune is the God principle, the creative muse, as it were, the magic and the mystery of life. Now, in Neptune, you have both the higher and the lower aspects. You have spirituality, creativity, the higher love, and you also have the principles of escapism, addiction, and fantasy and illusion. And all of this is wrapped up in the symbolism of Neptune. And basically what it comes down to is this: the human heart flees from the ordinary. It wants and needs to dream. And a dream manifested in this world enables us to grasp an experience of life's mysterious, unseen essence. And the cinema is a means of making dreams physically manifest. Ergo, the cinema equals magic. It's truly a metaphysical subject because movies provide images in the collective psyche. Movies send out thought forms into the receptive public mind. Movies are actually a mass participation in creating thought forms, which makes us all magicians of a sort. The impact of film on society means that filmmakers and audiences dance together, you might say, in creating the images that permeate society. We can have really bad, ugly images, or we can have beautiful and uplifting images. Which would you like? So this is illustrated and to some degree created by the ethereal influence of the planet Neptune. Now, the history of film goes way back into when Neptune was in Taurus. The first motion pictures were actually developed under the sponsorship of a man called Leland Stanford and a Mr. Edward Muybridge, who successfully photographed a horse running in a series of 24 stereoscopic cameras. This was in Palo Alto, California. And naturally, PR being what it was even then, the press was present to record this. So this was meant to demonstrate whether a running horse ever had four legs lifted off the ground at once, and this says that it did. So this is sort of the first film image. As we go into Neptune sliding into Gemini in the late 1880s, we find that a garden scene called the Roundhay garden scene was just a very brief slice, few seconds worth, of motion picture. It's the earliest surviving motion picture. We find that the chart for this is very interesting. Oh, this is the horse film. We can see that here the major factor, Neptune, is actually in Taurus and conjunct Chiron at that point. when we get into Neptune going into Gemini, we have, of course, more motion. It is a motion picture, after all. So it was at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893 that Muybridge used his zoopraxiscope, as he called it, to show motion pictures to a paying public for the first time. And it was this guy named Dixon who was moving his hat for about 3 seconds that is considered one of the first motion pictures, and it was a huge hit. Everybody came to see this guy just move his hat. Nobody had seen it before. As Gemini moved into Cancer in the early 1900s, remember that Cancer is the sun sign of the USA. And some say that Neptune is exalted in Cancer. There's some argument about that. But it provided fertile creative ground for growth and a new art. And what we find is that there are a number of films that come out at this time that have a very emotional, heartfelt theme to them, the first of which was this little comedy called The Voyage to the Moon, Le Voyage de Lune, in which the man in the moon gets hit by a rocket ship. Nickelodeons played one-reelers in amusement parks accompanied by a pianist. So it was all entertainment for the masses from the very beginning. There was no real pretense to art at this point. This was just fun stuff. There was a development of animation and narrative styles and camera and shot techniques during the early 1900s, and the consolidation of very small American film companies into a trust, including Edison, Biograph, Vitagraph, and a number of others. And they were importers of European films as well. And this was taken by the government to be something of a monopoly, which was actually broken up in 1913. So from the very beginning, you have fears of manipulation of images affecting the masses, and the government trying to step in to do something about it. You have to watch those images. So while most filmmaking was carried out around New York, Southern California was deemed to have better weather, and so, of course, the film industry went there. Now, the first really successful film was, unfortunately, a very racist one called The Birth of a Nation, which debuted in early 1915 during the very last period of Neptune in Cancer as it moved into Leo. And here what you have is a transition into spectacle and showmanship while keeping some of the emotional melodrama and the nativist racist themes. Where have we seen themes like this come up recently? You got it, America. And it goes all the way back. Now, as Neptune moved into Leo in the summer of 1915, Hollywood came of age. What we find in the early 1920s is that it is estimated that roughly half of the American population, that's 50 million people, went to the movies on a weekly basis. So domestically, 800 feature films were produced annually, representing 82% of the global total. So America was a place for film. And several major studios were conceived at this time: Warner Brothers, Paramount, MGM, and Fox among them. Disney Studios, founded in 1923. And they made films that represented their view of life and what America was going to be. So you had movie palaces built for this purpose. People were to come out and escape everyday life and have a good time, and so they created these wonderful movie palaces where you could just go in all together and have a good time. And isn't that Neptunian? Everybody coming together. So among the film highlights were Pollyanna, starring Mary Pickford, the lovely early ingenue who was married to Douglas Fairbanks, and this is Mary's chart, and you can see that she had a Venus-Neptune conjunction in Gemini along with Pluto right there. How could she miss? She was very much in tune with the times. You had the comedies of Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and all the rest. And so at this time, there was development of the studio and star system. Now, what's intriguing to me when I began this research is that there was a real pivot point that almost yelled, astrology works! And this was at the end of the 1920s, where there was a transition from silent film into talkies. And just at that time, it turns out that the jazz singer, which was the first talkie, as they called it, with Al Jolson in blackface, corresponded to the entrance of Neptune into the sign of Virgo, which of course rules technology and is ruled by Mercury, which rules speech. Hence, we have talkies, no longer silent films. This occurred in the late 1920s. And by that time, the loose morals of the movie industry had come to the attention of the government once again. A very moralistic era, and so they wanted to control this. And so what they had was this fellow here named Joseph Breen. He was appointed by the government, actually by a company of the movie studio owners who had come together to prevent the government stepping in. There was a commission, a Senate commission called the Hayes Commission, which looked into the morality of movies and found it wanting and said, either you do something about this or we're going to shut the whole industry down. So in haste they appointed Joseph Breen, who was this very conservative, reactionary Catholic, to be basically the censor of movies. So everything went through this guy, and he literally snipped films in accordance with his own high-arched, nosed morals. So what we find is the Hayes Code, as it was called, came to represent a great deal of censorship in film during this period while Neptune was in Virgo. Now, so there was great morality tales. You had people literally during the Depression standing in line, trying to just live with any kind of comfort. And so Hollywood produced comfort films with Shirley Temple, child star, being a great star at that time. Who wanted to think you wanted to dance along with Shirley Temple? Shirley Temple's chart is very intriguing. She was sun sign Taurus, but she had a lot in Aries. She was one of those who really sort of began the child star system. So you had a lot of morality tales during this period. And then as Neptune went into Libra during World War II, you had movies which reflected the Aries-Libra themes, the bravery and versus cowardice. See any John Wayne movie. You had Casablanca representing the Venus-ruled Libra romances. You had Father of the Bride representing marriage and affection. All of these are Libra themes. All of this occurred during the transit of Neptune in Libra, and the movie industry reflected all of this. Afterwards, after World War II, you had films which represented the search for love, which was hard after the war. Everybody wanted to just settle down. So you had Ernest Borgnine in Marty. I met Ernie. He was a wonderful guy. You had film noir after the war. Women who had been instrumental in the war effort were forced to go back to the kitchen, back into domesticity. So you had the rise of film noir, in which the woman was the evil temptress, the one who forced you to perhaps murder your husband, murder her husband because you loved her, right? So you had all of this sexual tension, and this was all because of the Neptune in Libra moving into Scorpio energy. And speaking of temptresses, here we have Marilyn Monroe, perhaps the prime example of a Neptunian personality. Of course, she had Neptune rising in Leo in the first house. How perfect is that? She was a great star, but lived a bit of a sad life, and reflects both the escapist themes of Neptune as well as the just extraordinary magic that such a personality can convey. During this period, you also had the blacklisting of films and those who created them. This was when Neptune was going into Scorpio, so suspicion of and fear of the other was very much in vogue at that time. So you had, on the other hand, morality movies, which attempted to capture life is okay, don't worry about anything, get married, enjoy your life, like It's a Wonderful Life right here. But life moves on, and so you had rebels like John, or I was going to say John Dean, that is, of course, not John Dean. I'm blanking on the name. Who is that? That's Dean somebody. James Dean, there he is, who was a rebel with a cause, certainly. But the 1950s were another one of those eras where moralistic tales were brought back into vogue. Do you see a theme here that the government and the studio system always tries to get you to not think too much, or if you are going to think, at least think about within constricted fields. Okay, so this continued into the 1960s where you had these fluffy movies like Beach Blanket Bingo, starring Frankie and Annette. The Sound of Music. Now, during this period, Neptune was in a water sign. What does water rule? It rules music, among other things. Neptune being in another water sign. Here we have perhaps the heyday of the Hollywood musical. So you had all of these musicals, and you also had the Neptune in Scorpio theme of James Bond, 007. All of this occurred under this energy. And then as we move into Neptune and Sagittarius, you had these enormous stars, Liz and Dick. Actually, during the mid-60s, when Neptune was still in Scorpio, you had the sexual revolution occur. And these were the stars who just couldn't keep their hands off each other. You should see their charts. This is Liz's here. You can imagine. She has Sun and Mercury together along with Mars in Pisces. She is all about, and she even had violet eyes. She is very Neptunian. And Dick Burton, Richard Burton, who said he could speak from his toes, was a Sagittarian, and as Neptune went into Sagittarius, they did Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and basically changed the industry because it was very raw language. And at that point, it sort of liberated film to do more unconventional films, such as The Graduate, Easy Rider, and in the early 1970s, all of these auteurs, the directors, the young directors said, let's take this ball and do something with it. So you had Spielberg, you had all of these people. This is Spielberg's chart. He's a Sagittarian, as you might have guessed. He became famous during Neptune and Sagittarius. He is fascinating. His sun sits right on the galactic center. Spielberg's images permeate society. This, of course, is too short a presentation to go into all of these things. I'm just giving you the highlights here. But Spielberg is perhaps the prime example of Neptune in Sagittarius. The Godfather, a violent film which is possibly considered the greatest film ever, also during this period. Annie Hall was another one of these films, very intelligently written, as Sagittarius tries to expand social boundaries. Here was an unconventional woman. Jaws, during this period, became a huge blockbuster. Sagittarius is about more, more, more. So during this period, the box office exploded because of Jaws and Star Wars, which changed Hollywood. It meant that they were no longer really interested in making quality films, just what the profit margin was. And guess what happened then? Neptune went into Capricorn. So you have the bean counters, you have the agents, you have the people who were counting on making the most profits, and the agents sort of ruled the system after this. Uh, this is this is one of the great agents of his time, Michael Ovitz. Spielberg, Geffen, and Katzenberg started DreamWorks during the Neptune in Capricorn period. This was all about making money, consolidating and making money. That's very Capricornian in its theme. So during this period, you also had independent film coming to fore, because if you could fund movies that yourself, you didn't have to worry about the studio system. So learning how to fund your independent films was a theme during Neptune and Capricorn. During this period also, you had the rebirth of animation in Disney as a corporate entity. Corporate, Capricorn. You had all of the hard energy, the opposite of the sun sign of the US, Cancer, Neptune, Saturn, and Uranus all in Capricorn. So you had hard-assed heroes during this period, like Bruce Willis in Die Hard. And then you come across somebody like Tom Cruise, who embodied sort of that effervescent quality that could probably grow into a mature man and be a nice guy at the same time. Tom's chart is very intriguing. Of course, we don't have a lot of time to go into it, but notice particularly the moon in Leo at the top of the chart. The guy was meant to be a star. There's just no doubt about it. And his sun sign, Cancer. So he became a star during this period. Also, Capricorn, or excuse me, Saturn, which rules Capricorn's old name in Greek mythology was what? Chronos, time. So during this period, you had a lot of time travel movies being made. The most famous of which is Back to the Future. You had another one going back in time, 19th century. Period pieces were very big. Dances with Wolves. Schwarzenegger, the Terminator, going back in time. And as Neptune then started moving toward Aquarius, you had more technology come into play, where CGI began to develop. And Jurassic Park was really the first movie to make great use of this CGI. You thought those dinosaurs were real. I was pretty terrified. Titanic, at that time the biggest motion picture ever, relied tremendously on special effects for its impact. And this occurred just as Neptune made its transition into Aquarius. Armageddon, one of those end of the world movies, the Leo Aquarius axis, the hero is going to save the world for the future. Twilight, another one of those films which says iconoclastic people are good. It doesn't matter if he's a vampire, I'm going to love him anyway. All of that Aquarian, I gotta be me kind of energy. Now, during this period, we began to see some of the superhero movies being made. And the villains during this period, one of them, poor Heath Ledger, young guy who died early. He was the villain, of course, the Joker in The Dark Knight. Yeah, that's what it's called, The Dark Knight. And Heath Ledger's chart is, look at that Pluto right on the 7th house cusp there. And yet he had Aries rising. This is a guy who had everything but sort of felt compelled to go to the depths to get it. And he died, unfortunately, of drug addiction. And he became famous during this Neptune in Aquarius period, where you basically did your own thing. But movies weren't really very quality. In the early 2000s, you had films like this, comedies without any heart in them. Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle? I mean, this is like the latter day beach blanket bingo, right? So the studios basically had given up their heart to technology, Leo Aquarius. And finally, you had to come full circle to the science fiction. Of course, Aquarius is the future, so you had films like District 9 becoming popular. And as Neptune moved into Pisces, or was close to it, you had films like this, All for One, One for All, the Lord of the Rings movies, very Aquarian. The group aspect of Aquarius becoming very popular. Avatar was made and became popular just as Neptune moved into Pisces. It takes place on a fantastical planet and contains images that are actually drawn from ancient mythology. Iron Man, here is actually it was a good movie. A lot of movies made since then weren't so good, but I thought Robert Downey Jr. did a great job in this movie. And this was one of the first superhero movies, also befitting that Leo Aquarius axis, that then continued into the Neptune in Pisces. Pisces rules victimhood. So what have we had recently? We've had a lot of films which deal with suffering, victimhood, and the resurrection of one's spirit, transcending those sufferings. 12 Years a Slave is one of those movies. 50 Shades of Grey, fantasy, sadomasochism, B&D as fantasy rather than reality. But again, is a form of victimhood, suiting the Pisces axis. Guardians of the Galaxy. Is there anything more Piscean than fantasy? How many fantasy movies are being made right now? It's the glut on the market right now. All of this is because Neptune is at the midpoint of Pisces. It's at its strongest point right now. La La Land. Okay, what does Pisces rule in the human body? It rules the feet. So, expect more musicals, Neptune, and dance musicals, Pisces. This is Emma Stone, who won the Oscar this past year for La La Land. This is her chart. Notice the Sun and Pluto in a water sign, Scorpio. Whenever you find that Neptune is in a water sign, lots of dance, lots of emotion. What you find during the periods of evolution of film is that indeed movies do seem to correspond to the transits of Neptune. Alex Trenoweth asked me to add Aries in there to make any prophecies about what will happen when movies, what movies will be like when Neptune goes into Aries. Well, of course, you'd expect probably more war movies. But actually, my view is that Neptune and Aries will sort of create a whole new genre. I don't think film will be film as it is now. I tend to think that the image by itself will have more independence. I think we'll see more holographic types of images come to the fore. Not just three-dimensional, multi-dimensional, where we can actually step into the image itself, which would seem to suit the tradition of Aries being very independent. I also think that new technology will come to the fore, which will make basically everything we've done to this point obsolete. I don't think the film industry will survive in its current form. It's already dying. As new technology takes over, I do think that distribution of a lot of films will transition into basic online distribution. I think that film will survive as an art form, but I think that it will appear different. I think it will appear basically as a projection of one's own self. In other words, I think it's possible that we'll come to a point where our own energy can create our own film. How's that for a prophecy? Where we can simply think something and it will turn into a three-dimensional image. It's extraordinary to think about. I'm sorry this was such a fast presentation. There was so much to cover. Read the book. It's in the magazine. It's 8,000 words. I cover a lot in there. But you can get an idea from this that there is an evolution. As film has gone through its various stages, it does seem to correspond to the transits of Neptune. I have found that very fascinating. I hope you have as well. Thank you. Yes, sir. Sure. Okay. Fine. I have two films that I've written that are currently in pre-production. One is called Sweet Horizon, and it's about two young men who take a bohemian journey down Route 66 to sort of discover themselves. And we see America as it was previously, as it is now, and in a visionary sequence in the third act, America as it can be. It's a romance, sort of it's a buddy picture road movie. Ed Asner is attached to it as the old grandfather whose diary of romantic conquest down Route 66 back in the 40s sort of sets off the plot. It's a lot of fun. And the other one is called Sound and Noise. It's an adaptation of a book about a 30-something artist and art history teacher who moves to this very small, picturesque little Pennsylvania town, and his beloved wife has a terrible car accident, falls into a coma, and after 3 really devastating years, Tom McNamara meets this beautiful ex-rock and roll diva who is now living the simple life in this small town, and sparks fly, and so Tom must decide where his own passions lie, with the love of his life who may never awaken, or with the famous Jackie Joy who rekindles his creativity. So if those sound like something you might be interested in, look for them, hopefully very shortly. Thank you so much.